For 4 years, the boy in the east bedroom had not said his father's name. Not on birthdays, not on the mornings his father lingered at the door before leaving for the airport. Not even on the night the boy fell from the garage roof trying to see if the stars looked different from up there and broke his wrist in 2 places and still only screamed, wordless, until the pain made him pass out. He had words for other things. He spoke to the housekeeper about the weather. He spoke to his tutor about long division. But the word dad had vanished from him the year his mother died, the way some words do when the mouth simply refuses to risk them again. And his father, a woman named Desta Hale, who had built a logistics empire out of a single delivery van and 11 years of sleeping 4 hours a night, had not heard her own name in her son's voice since the funeral. She had tried everything money could buy. 3 child psychologists, a specialist flown in from Boston, who charged more in a single session than most people made in a month, a therapy dog that the boy ignored so completely. The dog eventually preferred the kitchen staff. None of it touched him. He moved through the house like something underwater, and Desta, who had negotiated with steel manufacturers and outmaneuvered men twice her age in boardrooms across 2 continents, found that none of those skills were any use against the silence of a 9-year-old boy named Idris. She had grown up in a row house in Scarborough with a single bulb in the kitchen and a mother who cleaned office towers downtown before the sun came up. And she had promised herself, somewhere around age 14, that her own children would never know what it felt like to want something and not have it. What she had not accounted for was that there were things you could not buy your way into, and her son's voice was one of them. Her husband had died in the accident with her. No, not died. Survived, technically, and left. 6 months after the funeral, he had packed 2 suitcases and said he could not live in a house that grieved this loudly, and Desta had not stopped him, because some part of her understood, even as she despised him for it, that the house did grieve loudly, and that she herself had no idea how to make it stop. The housekeeper she hired that autumn arrived on a Tuesday, with a duffel bag and a transit pass, and introduced herself with a handshake that was firm but unhurried. Her name was Solange Vachon Pratt, and she was 31, and there was nothing about her resume that should have made any difference at all. She had worked in 3 other houses before this one. She had references. She had, notably, no interest whatsoever in the size of the property or the name on the mailbox, which Desta noticed immediately because everyone noticed the name on the mailbox. Desta watched her, the way she had watched the 3 housekeepers before her, except this time she gave it shape. She told her household manager, a soft-spoken man named Philip who had been with the family 11 years, that she would be observing the new hire personally for the first few weeks, and that he should refer to her, around the staff, as Dee from the cleaning agency, filling in temporarily. Philip had looked at her for a long moment, the way he sometimes did when he disapproved of something, but had decided long ago it was not his place to say so, and then he had said, "Understood, Miss Hale," in a tone that communicated he understood considerably more than the instruction itself. It was not difficult to disappear into the house. The estate sat on 11 acres outside the city, close enough to commute, but far enough that no one driving past would know what was behind the cedar hedge, and the staff rotation was high enough that one more face barely registered. Desta put on a gray housekeeping uniform, 2 sizes too big, the kind with Hale Profitscrefus stitched small over the breast pocket, and she carried a caddy of cleaning supplies she did not know how to use properly, and she followed Solange from room to room with the particular humility of a woman pretending to learn a job she had never once had to do herself. What she noticed first was what Solange did not do. She did not ask about the family photographs that had been quietly removed from the hallway after the funeral and never replaced. She did not ask why the boy's door stayed shut for hours at a time. She did not perform sympathy the way the others had, the careful tilted head, the softened voice reserved for tragedy. She simply worked, and when Idris drifted past her in the hallway, silent, his socked feet making no sound on the hardwood, She did not change anything about herself to accommodate his silence. She did not look up hopefully. She did not narrate her own kindness for an audience. The first real moment happened in the second week, in the conservatory at the back of the house, where Idris kept a shoebox of cicada shells he had collected the summer. His mother was still alive and had never once shown anyone. He had taken it out that afternoon and set it on the windowsill, and a draft from the cracked window had sent the lid sliding off the ledge, and it had cracked against the stone floor. He stood over it. He did not pick it up. Desta, dusting the bookshelf nearby in her oversized uniform, watched and did nothing, because she did not know what to do, and because some old fear told her that doing the wrong thing would be worse than doing nothing. Solange came in from the hallway with a basket of folded linens, saw the cracked lid, set the basket down, and crouched to pick it up without comment. She turned it over once in her hands and said, "This kind always cracks along the seam. It's not the cleanest break, but it still holds." She did not hand it to him right away. She set it gently back on the windowsill where it had been, lid balanced loosely on top the way it was before, and said, "There you go," and went back to her linens. Idris stood there a long moment. Then he picked the lid up himself and pressed it down until it sat properly, and Desta, watching from behind a stack of National Geographic back issues, felt something move in her chest that she would later be unable to name precisely, except to say, it felt like the first crack of light through a door she had assumed was painted shut. She watched Solange for the weeks that followed with the same focus she had once brought to hostile takeovers. What she found surprised her in its smallness. Solange ate lunch alone in the staff kitchen, usually something simple she'd brought from home, and she sent money home to her mother in Trois-Rivières every payday without fail. Philip had mentioned it once, offhand, that she always asked where the nearest money transfer location was. She rode the regional bus to the property gates each morning and walked the rest, declining the car service offered to staff. She kept a photograph tucked in her uniform pocket, an old one, creased at the corners, and Desta saw her touch it sometimes, briefly, the way people touch things to remind themselves of something true. With Idris, she did almost nothing, and that nothing was the most remarkable thing Desta had ever watched a person do. Solange did not chase him. She did not initiate. She simply made herself present in rooms he passed through. Reading in the window seat of the upstairs study, when he wandered by, sorting laundry in the hallway closet, while he sat at the top of the stairs, pretending to do nothing in particular. And she never once required him to acknowledge that she was there. Over 3 weeks, the distance between them closed without either of them seeming to move. One late afternoon, Solange sat in the conservatory with a paperback for the better part of an hour while Idris stood at the far window, supposedly watching birds at the feeder. Neither spoke. When she finally rose to leave, she paused at the door, did not turn around, and said, "If you ever want to know what kind of bird keeps stealing all the suet, I can show you tomorrow. I used to feed them at my mom's place." Then she left before he had to decide whether to answer. Desta, dusting a windowsill she had already dusted twice, thought, she understands something about him that none of the specialists managed in 8 months. She began inventing reasons to be near her. She lingered in corridors she had no cleaning duties in. She found herself in the staff kitchen at odd hours. Once, leaning against the doorframe while Solange wrote in a small notebook at the table, Solange glanced up without looking surprised and said, "You should do a lot of dusting for someone who's never actually touched a duster before today." Desta said she was being thorough. Solange said, and went back to her notebook, the corner of her mouth pulling sideways in something that was not quite a smile, but lived in its neighborhood. It was Philip who finally confronted her. Late one evening in the corridor, outside the estate office, the house quiet around them. "If I may, Ms. Hale," he said, in the careful way of a man who had rehearsed the sentence several times before saying it aloud. "This arrangement is starting to carry real risk. If Ms. Vachon Pratt discovers she has been observed under false pretenses by her own employer, she will not take it well. Few people would." Desta said she understood the risk. Philip said nothing further, which was, as always with Philip, its own kind of statement. She kept the uniform on anyway. It was a Thursday evening in late October when the storm rolled in fast off the lake. The kind that turned the sky the color of a bruise, an hour before the rain even started. Desta was in her study reviewing a shipping contract she could not afford to think about, right then when she heard it. A sound from the second floor, furniture scraping. Then something else underneath it, something that did not sound like a 9-year-old boy at all. Something closer to an animal in a trap. She was at the stairs before she'd consciously decided to move. Philip was already in the hallway. They reached Idris's door together and heard him inside. The sound continuing, not screaming exactly, but something rawer than that, something tearing its way out of a body that had held it in for 4 years. Footsteps came fast up the back stairs. Solange, still in her uniform, her face arranged into the particular stillness of someone choosing calm rather than feeling it. She moved past Desta, without a word, put her hand flat on the door, looked at her once, just a look, nothing said, and went in. She did not turn on the light. The room was lit only by the storm-gray window. Idris was crouched in the corner by his desk, hands pressed over his ears, rocking. Solange crossed the room and lowered herself to the floor beside him without hesitation, and put her arms around him the way you hold something you have decided, completely, not to let go of. He shook against her. The windows took the rain in long sheets. She began speaking, barely above a whisper, the words going into the room rather than out of it. You don't have to hold it together right now. You've been holding it together for so long, and you don't have to keep doing that, not for one more second. A pause, the rain loud against the glass. Your mom wouldn't want you carrying this all by yourself. She loved you too much for that. Another pause. Nobody is leaving this room. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Something in Idris broke open the way a seam finally gives after being strained too long. It started as breath, became a sob, and then, cracked and rusted from 4 years of disuse, a single word came out of him. Mom. Just that. 3 letters, the first word he had said in 4 years that had not been about long division or the weather. Desta, standing frozen in the doorway, put a hand against the frame to steady herself. She did not trust her legs. Her son was crying. Fully, without restraint, for the first time since the funeral. And she stood there and let her own tears go without wiping them, because there was no version of composure available to her in that moment. And for once in her life, she did not reach for one. When it was over, Idris had fallen asleep against Solange's shoulder on the floor, and she stayed there until his breathing steadied, unmoving, her arm gone numb beneath him and her not caring. She looked up once toward the door and found it empty. Desta had stepped back into the hallway before she could be seen, and stood there in the dark with her hand pressed flat against her own chest, thinking, she just gave me my son back. And then, almost in the same breath, she has no idea who I am. The week that followed was the gentlest the house had felt in 4 years. Idris ate breakfast at the table instead of taking a tray to his room. He followed Selene into the garden in the mornings, while she watered the planters, not talking much, but present in a way that had a different texture than his old silence, thinner, with gaps in it now, room for things to get through. He asked her, one afternoon, which plants needed cutting back, and she showed him, and they worked side by side without needing to fill the air between them with words. Desta watched from the study window and felt something she did not let herself name yet, only registered as the shape where a feeling might eventually arrive. She also noticed, with a discomfort she tried to set aside, that she looked forward to the evenings more than she should have. That she noticed instantly when Solange was not in a room she walked into. That she had not thought about another person this way in longer than she could comfortably admit. The reckoning did not come through Philip. It came on an ordinary Wednesday, when Solange, covering for an absent staff member, found herself reorganizing the filing room off the estate office and opened the wrong door by mistake. On the wall behind the desk hung a framed magazine cover. Desta in a charcoal blazer at a podium, the headline beneath her face unmistakable. Solange stood very still, Then she walked to the staff schedule pinned by the door and found the name at the top. D. Hale, principal resident. She looked back at the photograph for a long moment, put everything back exactly as she'd found it, and closed the door with great care. She found Desta in the hallway near the conservatory late that afternoon. She did not raise her voice. "Who are you?" she said, not a question with a question's shape. A statement that happened to end in the right punctuation. Desta did not insult her by pretending not to understand. "My name is Desta Hale," she said. "I own this house." Solange said nothing for a moment, working through it, the uniform, the weeks of conversation, the things she had said, believing she was talking to a colleague who had nothing to lose by hearing them. "You were watching me," she said. "Yes, you were testing me, at first, and then?" Desta had no answer that wouldn't sound worse than the silence. Solange's jaw tightened. "So every single thing I told you about myself, you were just filing it away. The whole time I thought I was talking to someone like me, and you were my employer." "Yes." She looked at Desta a moment longer. "That's a cruel thing to do to a person," she said, and walked away. For 2 days the house carried the weight of it like weather. Solange did not quit, but she did not speak to Desta beyond what the job required. She kept showing up for Idris exactly as before, with the same unforced steadiness, and Desta watched her hold those two things, her hurt and her care for the boy, entirely separately, and felt it as a quiet rebuke, because it was one. She tried to apologize once in the upstairs hall. Solange said, "Mrs. Hale, I'm working," and kept moving. Desta let her go, but she could not let herself go. She sat in her study that night and walked back through all of it. The uniform, the false name, the weeks of closeness built on a lie of omission, and saw it plainly for what it was. Not caution, fear wearing caution's clothes. She had not trusted anyone enough to simply hire them and believe them since her husband left. Maybe since before that. She had needed to verify everything, because verifying was the only language fear had ever taught her to speak. And in speaking it, she had done something cruel to a woman who had given her son back to her. Idris had caught the edges of the confrontation. Not the words, but the tension in the hallway. And the next morning he was quieter again, drawn back toward the window seat. Desta felt the old dread rise in her like cold water rising past her knees. That evening she went to Solange's quarters and knocked. "Whatever you're feeling toward me, you've earned it," she said when the door opened. But he saw something today, and it scared him. "And I'm not asking you as your employer right now. I'm asking you as his mother. Please don't let him think he's losing you too." Solange looked at her for a long moment. "He's not losing me," she said. "I need you to hear that clearly. That boy is not collateral damage in whatever this is between us. I won't let that happen to him." And she went and knocked on Idris's door and said through it, "Hey, still here. Nothing's changed. You want hot chocolate?" And after a pause long enough to carry the weight of everything he'd survived, Idris said, "Yeah." His voice came out small and rough at the edges, but it was his. Desta stopped wearing the uniform after that. She came down to breakfast as herself, in her own clothes, at her own table, and stopped eating alone in her study the way she had for 4 years. The first evening she sat down at dinner, Idris looked at her across the table for a long moment, as if recalculating something, and then simply sat down too. They didn't talk much. But they were in the same room, at the same time, eating the same meal, and that alone was more than they had managed in years. When Desta said goodnight, Idris said, "Night, Mom," the first words he had directed at her, by name, since the funeral. She had a real conversation with Solange not long after. Not surveillance dressed up as friendship, but the actual thing, two people in a room choosing honesty. Desta apologized without performing it, without padding it with excuses. She said she had been afraid, and that fear had made her dishonest, and that Solange had deserved better from the start. Solange listened with her full attention and did not hand over forgiveness before she was ready to. Then she asked, "When you were watching me, was there ever a moment you thought, maybe I should just introduce myself like a normal person?" Desta considered it honestly. "The second day," she said. "What stopped you?" "I didn't know how." Solange was quiet a moment. "That might be the most honest thing you've said to me since I got here." "It might be." She told Desta about her brother that evening, not as a performance, the way she never made anything a performance. Her brother had stopped speaking at 12, not so unlike Idris, and the neighborhood had written him off the way people write off kids whose needs are loud and inconvenient. She'd been 17 with no resources and no training, just the stubborn certainty he was still in there somewhere. She'd sat with him after school every day, hadn't asked him questions, read beside him, cooked with him when he'd allow it, kept his world small until it was safe, then slowly let it widen. He was 23 now, working at a community center, called her every Sunday. "You're extraordinary," Desta said. "I'm not," Solange said. "I just paid attention. In my world, that's rare enough to look extraordinary." "Your world needs a better baseline," Solange said, and Desta laughed before she could stop herself, surprised by the sound of it. Winter came early that year, the way it does in this part of the country, the light going thin and silver through the tall windows. Idris started a few sessions at a community art program. Not full-time, just an afternoon here and there, and he came home and sat at the kitchen table with his sketchbook, and occasionally, without looking up, said things like, "There's a kid in my class who argues with the teacher about everything," and Solange would say, "About what kind of everything?" And they'd go back and forth in easy, companionable rhythm, while Desta sat across from them, with her tea and her laptop, learning how to receive an ordinary evening as the gift it actually was. She started a foundation that December, something she'd been turning over since autumn. Funding for child bereavement counseling in communities that could never afford what her own wealth had bought her. The kind of underfunded clinics with waitlists, 8 months long, because nobody with the power to fix it had bothered to look closely enough to see the need. She named it after her mother, who had cleaned office towers before sunrise for 30 years, and never once complained where her children could hear it. And she made the announcement quietly, without press, because this was never about her name being seen. When she told Idris, he was quiet a moment and then said, "Grandma would have liked that." "I know," Desta said. They sat with it together. She asked Solange to direct the Foundation's family programs, careful not to frame it as a reward for what she'd given them, because it wasn't payment, and Solange would have seen through it instantly if it had been. She told her the truth, that she understood something about these children that no clinician Desta had ever hired had managed to demonstrate, and that understanding deserved to reach further than one household. Solange sat with the offer 2 days. When she came back, she said, "If I take it, it's because I believe in the work, not as a favor to you. I wouldn't want it any other way, and I want real say over the programming." "Done." She put out her hand. Solange shook it and held on a beat longer than the handshake required, and neither of them mentioned it. Spring came late but came hard, the garden filling in all at once the way it does after a long gray winter. Idris asked if they could put in a vegetable bed along the south fence, and Solange said she knew exactly what to do with that soil. And Desta found herself buying topsoil and seed packets on a Saturday afternoon with a lightness she hadn't felt spending money in years, because this was something she could build with her own 2 hands instead of her checkbook. They worked out there most weekends, not always side by side, but always in the same patch of afternoon. One Saturday in May, Idris called them over from the fence line, grinning in a way Desta hadn't seen since before the accident, unself-conscious, just delighted by green things pushing up through dark soil. "We planted those," he said, when Solange admired the seedlings. "We did," she agreed, and the three of them stayed there a long time, not doing much of anything, just being there together while the afternoon went gold around them. That evening, after Idris had gone in to wash up, Desta and Solange stayed out by the fence until the light went all the way down and the stars started coming up over the tree line, one section at a time. Desta said what she'd been carrying for months, plainly, without orchestrating it. "This isn't about the foundation, and it isn't about Idris. It's just about you and me." Solange said nothing, looking up. "You walked into the coldest house I'd ever lived in," Desta said, And I had honestly stopped believing it could be anything else, and you changed that without trying to do anything grand. Just by being exactly who you are, every day, with no performance attached to it. I know I made it harder than it had to be, because I didn't know how to trust anyone by then. I'm still learning. But what I feel when you walk into a room, I haven't felt that in longer than I can say, and I'd rather tell you than spend another week pretending I don't. Solange was quiet a long moment. You know what I thought? The day I found out who you actually were? No. I thought, of course. Of course, the one person who ever talked to me like I was just a person turns out to be the one person who lied to me about who she was. I know. And also, and I'm still working this part out, I thought, but she did talk to me like I was a person. That's not nothing. It's not enough, Desta said. No, Solange agreed. But it's a start. The proposal wasn't planned, which mattered because Desta was a woman who planned everything, who treated surprise as a risk to be engineered out of existence. It happened on an ordinary Thursday in June, near the vegetable bed, where the early tomatoes had come up faster than expected, the air thick with cut grass and the particular warmth of early summer evenings. They'd been talking about nothing. The Foundation's next grant cycle, a book Idris had recommended to both of them separately. And somewhere in the middle of it, something in Desta simply settled into certainty. She stopped mid-sentence. Solange noticed and looked at her. Desta reached into her jacket pocket, where she had been carrying the ring for 2 weeks, waiting for a moment she hadn't been trying to manufacture, and went down on one knee on the grass between the tomatoes and the fence post. You didn't just bring my son back to me, she said. You brought me back to myself. And I know what I'm asking isn't simple. And I'm asking it, knowing you've never needed a single thing I could give you, and that you could walk away from all of this tomorrow and be entirely fine. I'm not asking because I have something you lack. I'm asking because I want to be in your life, and I want you in mine, in whatever shape that ends up taking. Will you marry me? The garden held its breath around them, the first stars showing pale above the fence line. Then, from the direction of the porch, a voice said, "Please say yes." They both turned. Idris stood at the edge of the lawn, hands shoved in his pockets, his face doing something between embarrassment and everything he hadn't been able to feel for 4 years, all of it arriving at once. Solange laughed, a real laugh, startled out of her, and then she was crying. And she said yes, and Desta stood, and they held each other there in the new grass while Idris said, finally, from the porch steps, and pretended very hard to be interested in a beetle on the railing, so he'd have something to look at, besides the two of them. They sat together afterward, on the back steps, Desta and Solange and Idra between them, not arranged that way on purpose, just landing there because it felt right. At some point, looking out at the dark garden, Idris said, quietly, to no one in particular. She would have liked her. Grandma, Desta said. I know she would have. Solange reached over and put her hand on top of his and didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to add to the plain truth of what he'd said. They sat out there until the stars were fully up over the tree line, and the night held warm around them, and the garden held everything they'd planted in it, patient, and various, and alive, all of it having found its way up through the dark into the light. Sometimes the person who heals what's broken in a family doesn't arrive with an answer or a cure. Sometimes she just walks in quietly, pays attention, and stays.